Good morning for folks who are on already. We're just giving folks a little bit to jump on the line, so we'll be kicking off momentarily. Again, if you're logged on, we're just giving folks a couple more minutes to get on. So if you can just give us a moment, we're going to be launching in about 2 minutes. Well, good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. So very excited to welcome everyone to our webinar today, Why You Need a Project Management Office to Realize Your Value-Based Payment Strategy. I'm Alan Miller, Principal at Cope Health Solutions, and I'm going to be your host and facilitator today. We're excited to share with you some of the best practices and lessons we've picked up over the years. And we're also very pleased to have a leader from Partners in Care, which is a large IPA, to share some of their experiences as well. So what I'd like to do initially is introduce to you our presenters for today. Next, please. So aside from myself, we're lucky to have a really good group today. Yomi Ajao is also a principal and our Chief Consulting Officer here at Cope Health Solutions, as well as the President of Analytics for Risk Contracting, which is our analytics subsidiary for people taking risk. Yomi is a leader nationally in transformation required to be successful in risk. He's launched health plans, he's launched IPAs and MSOs, the management entities that drive risk for health plans and for provider groups that are taking risk. He's also an expert in performance improvement as a black belt, and just has extensive experience on both the provider and payer side. So very excited to have him here. PR Harbin is a vice president at Cope Health Solutions with very, very deep experience across risk, general operations leadership, and particularly large-scale PMOs and related activities to organize work. And he has really, over the years, he's done a number of major shared services implementations and strategic implementations related to risk and other aspects of healthcare. So we're excited to have him here today. And John Uzaitis is the Executive Director of Partners of Care IPA in New Jersey. He's also the Chief Commercial Officer for their MSO, Continuum Health. And John has been a leader in the state of New Jersey with also national experience in really helping to ensure that the IPA has both the right growth trajectory and the right contracting trajectory, and of course then ensuring that the MSO is going to provide those services that the entity needs to be successful. He's built a very large, very seasoned team, and also has had a very successful run with their high-performing medical group and the MSO backing him up. So again, really pleased to have those folks on. Thank you, John, for joining us. Go to the next slide, please. So a little bit of housekeeping for those on, just so you understand how it works. During the webinar, you can enter questions through the Q&A feature in Zoom, and there's a screenshot here that shows you how to do it. If you're not sure how to do that, you can always just email us at info@copehealthsolutions.com. We'll collect all the questions, including the questions we've gotten ahead of the webinar. If there's time, we'll ask questions of our speakers at the end. If there's not time, or if we do ask some of those questions, we're going to take all the questions, we're going to put answers to them, and then send you out a Q&A document, as well as a PDF copy of the deck and a link to the recording. And then you'll get a brief survey afterwards, which we really appreciate if you could share with us how we can improve in the future. Next slide, please. So today what we're going to do is we're going to have a little bit of an overview of what it means to move into value-based payment and taking financial risk. They call it risk for a reason. The need for a PMO, right, to be able to build the infrastructure and organize the infrastructure you need for success. Having John bring us a client's perspective, from an IP and a medical group, what does this mean? And then we'll talk about brief key takeaways, and if there's time for Q&A, we'll do that. Otherwise, again, we'll share those afterwards. So without further ado, I'd love to kick this off. I'm going to hand it off to Yomi Ajao. If we can go to the next slide to kick it off today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Especially the folks on the East Coast, and good morning if you're on the West Coast. So I would love to talk to you a little bit about the reason why we have why we need to have a PMO to orchestrate all the moving pieces in terms of moving into value-based risk model. Next, please. Yeah, so different entities are many times in different phase of maturity. Sometimes we talk to folks that are sort of new at the value-based journey. We have folks that have been doing it for a few years, but on a limited basis. Some have done some work around upside only or paid for performance, so on and so forth. And so regardless of where you are in that journey, as you start moving towards downside risks, as we call it, or global risks in form of capitation and other forms, there are a few mindsets that we need to embrace. As Alan said, we are truly now going into a risk model whereby we are also financially accountable on the downside. So there are different levels of accountability that we need to embrace as an organization, ultimately to be successful. Some of the key call outs in that space is be able to actually walk through culturally whether we are ready to be able to do it. Many times, many of our clients, they run a different book of business. So now that we are taking on this type of book of business, the mentality needs to get adjusted in terms of the accountability towards ensuring that we manage total cost of care. Another key element to that is also data. Data is key to making decisions, and obviously understanding where you are within your progress in order for us to course correct and be expeditious at it. So it's not only just we can't only just rely on whether the quarterly or semi-annual reports that we get from the payers anymore. We need to have our own access to understanding what's going on and how to change directions as appropriate to ensure that we are not going to be financially liable at the end of the day. As a result of that cultural shift, there is also a management approach that we need to adopt. Many environments, there are high volume practices, or there are an IPA that runs medical groups that run high volume practices, and volume is value in that kind of space. But the mindset needs to shift to outcome is value. And outcome doesn't necessarily is all about the volume. is also actually how are we appropriately using services, and how are we adopting preventive practices, so we don't have a large chunk of our population, for lack of a better word, either overusing because we haven't applied those preventive practices as early as possible. And then the last two key elements that I want to mention today is providers. There's a lot of work that we can do, from data, from organizing and understanding practices, from a care management practice or practice management practices, that we need to understand and embrace, and in some cases developed, in other cases redefine. But all roads lead to providers, and how do we engage them and align them, both in process, financially, to ensure that they are rolling in the same direction as what the supporting infrastructure is also rolling at the same time. So being able to understand and adjust financial incentive, understand their processes that they have to be part of on a daily basis, and how does this overlay adjust it, and also from a lot of the preventive practices that we're just talking about, the beginning of that conversation, a large chunk of that is ensuring that we have that primary care network to really engage the population as early and as often as possible, so we can avoid those high spend catastrophic type of situation down the line. Next. So there are a plethora of different arrangements, and we've tried to capture a large chunk of it on this with this visual. And it spans a gamut, and sometimes it's a lot of very bright people getting in the room and coming up with different models, but they all are trying to get towards they're all trying to get towards similar direction of how do we manage total cost of care of the population, how do we come out with high quality care for our members or for our population, and how do we do it in a financially sustainable type of fashion. And there are a plethora of different solutions or approaches out there, and as we move towards downside risks, which is what you will see towards your right hand side, depending on how the screen is oriented. The need for having our own infrastructure, what we call an MSO, infrastructure management services organization infrastructure, to be able to ensure that we deliver the value and we the value that we promise is essential compared to some of the other models that is sort of either for performance or fee for service or just upside only type of mindset. So different needs and different skill set is required as we journey forward towards the maturity curve of taking on different risk models. Next slide, please. So there, like I mentioned, there are a plethora of different financial arrangements, and as you can see, there are key attributes to each one of them, and some of them have, many of them have some commonalities across from it in terms of how we actually look at different contracts and try to manage the complexity of it, which is obviously why we are all having a conversation around what is the PMO infrastructure to be able to be successful in the setup, stand-up, and obviously ongoing management of all the risk contracts. And when we start digging into each one of the different type of risk contracts out there, many of them obviously gears towards what is the attribution to primary care, what is the incentive to ensuring that providers are in alignment to managing total cost of care, and what are all the other components that is sort of required to be able to be successful at it. Sometimes I talk to many of our clients and I describe it as there's a mathematical exercise that needs to be performed to be able to ensure that all the moving variables are understood and optimized as much as possible, to ultimately ensure that we are gaining membership at a financially sustainable fashion. From a risk-adjusted acquisition of members standpoint, we are understanding all the variables that includes in terms of reducing and managing total cost of care, including all the different aspects of providing care, drugs, post-acute, and so on and so forth. All the referrals back and forth between primary care specialty to specialty. How are we managing the network for that population to ensure that we are keeping and using the most highly talented at the top of their license usage of people in terms of being able to take care of the population. Next slide, please. So, kind of going back to the math exercise in terms of how the dollars flow, it's crucial to understand that, because it plays, even though the flow of dollars is at a high level, is about the same, depending on the contract structure that we are working with. The flow of dollar is different in terms of the routing of the dollars are different. Some of them are straightforward, some of them are quite involved, and they also have a high degree of influence on what we need to do downstream in terms of the operating infrastructure we need to pull together to be able to be successful at it. And that needs to be understood across the organization, so we all ensure that we are rowing the same direction to be able to achieve success. So this, as many of you probably have had conversations and even gotten into some of this, is the emergence of payers, the health plans, obviously transferring risks, and in many cases they are also transferring responsibility of managing those members to the providers at the same time. So many times the first conversation is, what is the dollars that's getting transferred? What is the operations that is getting transferred? What do we expect the provider organizations to be doing to be able to better manage this population? So being able to understand and orchestrate all that from a financial and operational sense is quite a bit of optic that we help most of our clients with, and quickly we'll see that necessitates the need for us to keep our pulse on all the moving pieces, because any one of these variables going out of alignment can be a difference maker between whether we are successful or whether we're not successful. Next slide, please. So one of the key areas to on an operational basis, which I spend quite a bit of time on with many of our clients, is going through a process whereby we know who's responsible for what. So there are many operational areas depending on the risk arrangements that we are involved in. So if it's a global capitation, which tends to be more on the extreme of the side of the pendulum, there's quite a bit of infrastructure that the provider entity needs to be able to do very well. Some of them have to pay claims, have to do utilization management, they have to have data capabilities. They have to have credentialing capabilities, quite a plethora of them. So one of the things that we've been able to walk through over the years is to be able to demarcate for each one of these functions. There are some common functionalities around them. So in terms of what is a governance process around that operational element. So let's say we're talking about credentialing as an example. What is the governance process that we need to adopt across the board? Who's going to be the management team on a go-forward basis? And on the operational basis, which team is going to be the boots on the ground? What data are they going to use? What technology is going to serve them? And obviously administrative overhead to make sure that everything goes well. So being able to actually understand all the elements and being able to now go into the next slide, please. Now being able to now go into who is responsible for them and what kind of arrangements do we have. Many times when we talk to many of our clients, many of them are sort of new to this world, or they've been doing it at a limited scale over a few years, and they're obviously looking for partners to support them in building their capability up so they can manage those population successfully. And there's quite a bit of orchestration that goes inside it. Sometimes they have one partner, sometimes they have many partners coming together to be able to do it. And obviously, as you have many organizations, and we have to go through what we call a build, buy, or lease type of conversation, who is doing what based on those things that I identify in the prior slide. And in what kind of arrangement are we doing it? Is it going to be a delegation that function is delegated to this other entity? Or is it going to be a co-management type of relationship that we have, so on and so forth. So there's a need up front to be able to define what that relationship is, who's responsible for what, who's accountable for which of the functions and what kind of capacity. So we go through this assessment process whereby we'll be able to work with the client and all the partners to be able to identify what is required. Next slide, please. So as an example of what one would look like in terms of some of the core areas, depending on the type of risk contract that we are taking on and who's responsible for what. And I think the key part of it is not necessarily to scare you all in terms of the complexity that needs to get managed. The key essence of this is to be able to help everybody understand that there's quite a bit of complexity in moving towards this new journey. What is the infrastructure we need to have to make sure that we keep everything in front of us, we keep it organized, we keep all the moving pieces and all the, for lack of better word, the players that are our partners in managing this population? What are the infrastructure we need to have to be able to manage the stand-up of or the implementation well as when we are operating in what are the project management infrastructure we need to pull together to be able to be successful at all these functions and work that needs to get done. So, which is obviously the key essence of why we need a PMO and a very strong PMO structure to make sure that we have everything in front of us. Next slide, please. So I'll pass it over to PR, and PR will talk to us about the need and infrastructure we need to put in place to make sure that all the elements that we need to build and support, they are well organized and we are all rowing in the same direction. PR.
Thank you, Yomi. I appreciate it. And again, welcome to everyone who has joined us. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on your time zone. And Yomi, thank you for sharing some of the insight into the complexity that it takes to begin and to ultimately succeed on this journey of moving to a value-based and risk-based type of organization. And for all of you, the thing that I really hope resonated very much with you was the number of different groups that may be involved and all of the different things that may be in flight at any particular given time. The importance of knowing who is responsible for what and making sure that your resources are being used at top of license. And many of those things may on the surface seem like very daunting challenges, but we believe that one of the most effective ways to approach this is as making part of your journey toward a risk-based arrangement or a risk-based structure, incorporating a PMO into your structure to be the centerpiece for your governance, for your execution, and for assisting with all of those different things. Next slide, please. So in understanding what a PMO really is, it's a term that you've probably heard used in a number of different contexts in a number of different industries, and it might conjure up some very interesting ideas as to what constitutes a PMO in an organization. I'm not going to lie to you, I've worked with PMOs that were not great. I've worked with PMOs that did a lot of things that PMOs really weren't supposed to do, and many people were left asking questions in those organizations about how did the PMO actually add to our value? Because it seemed like the PMO just increased bureaucracy. It added all kinds of forms to fill out. It added checklists and status reports that we had to do, and things seemed to slow down when you had this project manager who was running around and telling you that you had to think about and plan everything and get it all into the appropriate forms and documented. And so a lot of people got frustrated with PMOs. And many people believed that really all that they were effective at doing was increasing the bureaucracy and claiming a small army of people who talked this unknown language, maybe conjuring up the images of the geek squad at Best Buy running around in the white shirts and the black ties with their clipboards and their smartphones and checking on the schedules as they go. But the important thing to understand is that's not what a PMO really is meant to do. What a PMO is focused on doing, and its most important purpose, is keeping the organization focused on delivering real value. And that's why they are so crucial in making this risk-based journey and moving towards value-based care. Because all of the initiatives that you have going on that are all tied together with interconnectedness, with dependencies, with teams that are both inside your organization and across many other organizations as well. Each of those initiatives is intended to produce some kind of value. And you build on that value as you go, and you build on that value as you move toward your overall objectives of the defined structure and delivering better care to your patients. And the PMO is really intended to be the organization that marshals the resources around delivering that value, that understands the resources that you have in the organization and how they are being used, and making sure that they're being used in the most effective and the most efficient ways. It brings a standardized approach to delivery so that you know that everything that you are approaching, you're approaching consistently. And it also manages your delivery and your risk. It manages all of those interdependencies that can cause delays. It manages the internal conflicts that might slow down. It manages supply and demand across your project teams, making sure that everybody has what they need and keeping obstacles out of the way. Most of all, the PMO is intended to keep your organization and your teams focused on delivering the intended business value of your initiatives. And there's research that shows and has shown consistently over the last several decades that projects with a project manager are more than 3 times more likely to finish successfully. That means finishing on schedule, finishing under budget, and delivering the full value that they were intended to deliver from the beginning. 3 times more likely. And that's why we believe that incorporating a PMO into your journey toward risk-based care is an important aspect. But how do you know for sure if you really need a PMO? Well, let's move to the next slide. There are a number of things within your organizations that might be those waving signal flags that tell you, hey, we could benefit from having a PMO. If you are dealing with a lot of complexity, if you're dealing with many projects that are going on at once and you're trying to keep track of everything that's happening across all of them, if you have projects or initiatives that include team members that are inside of your organization and tie together team members from other organizations, if you have critical deadlines that you have to hit that have real implications to your organization, to regulatory compliance, to commitments to investors, if you have critical deadlines that must be met, and that's common across many of your initiatives, if you're not entirely sure, if you have questions at all about whether or not your resources are being used to their full and most effective capacity, and if you're doing things that aren't just routine operations, things that have a defined timeline, things that have a defined scope, things that have a beginning and an end date, that aren't just your regular day-to-day operations. Any and all of these things can be signals that your organization is going to benefit significantly from implementing a PMO. But what does that really mean? Okay, so what does a PMO look like? Well, one of the things that we want to spend some time talking about today is the fact that for every organization, there is no one size fits all of a PMO. Next slide, please. So I can't tell you, hey, build a PMO that has this many people and uses this exact methodology and has these roles and responsibilities and is structured here in your organization, and guarantee that what I'm going to provide you is going to be successful for your organization. I've worked with PMOs that were as large as 1,500 people, and I've worked with PMOs that were as small as 2. One size of a PMO does not fit all, and it's not all about your staffing. It's not all about organization size. There are questions that come into play about how does your organization operate and how do you work with your partners? Do you need a PMO that is centralized or decentralized, meaning one where all of the project managers are part of one singular team and they own all of the projects in the organization? Or a decentralized PMO where you have a group that sets consistent standards and provides reporting and consolidation and some generalized oversight of organizational governance, but project managers are distributed throughout the business units? What is the purpose and the scope of responsibility that the PMO will have? Are they advising the organization? Are they driving your projects? Are they subject matter experts? Are they required to do overall business analysis and understand how your operational workflows will be defined? What methodology will you use? Is it appropriate to have an iterative methodology or a waterfall methodology or a hybrid blend of both? How does it fit in terms of staffing? Do you need a PMO of 2? Is that successful? Will you have enough project managers, or do you need a PMO of 20, depending on the portfolio of projects that you're approaching? But most importantly, how is it going to fit into your organizational culture? Do you have an organization that adapts easily to routine, or do you have one that really resists change? Do you have an organization that is going to understand and get behind value delivery? Or do you have an organization that might need a little bit more coaxing, a little bit more coaching, and a little bit more change management? All of these things are things that should be taken into account when you are designing and implementing a PMO for your organization. One size does not fit all, and the PMO needs to be tailored to who you are as a firm. Next slide, please. But regardless of the design, there are some things that are very important and that carry throughout for all project management office structures. First and foremost is appointing a leader. Somebody has to own the PMO. It can't just be a hobby. It can't just be something that has been established in passing and has no real footing in the organization. It has to have top-down leadership support. You have to have an organizational leadership that embraces the idea that, yes, we are going to implement project management methodologies, and we are going to have project managers who will be responsible for leading and delivering our initiatives. We're going to make that part of our culture, and we're going to make that part of how we approach our delivery. You have to provide the right tools and processes. And that's not necessarily adopting the standard from Project Management Institute or the Agile approach or having the right tool set or the best piece of software. Sometimes it might be effectively built internal Excel spreadsheets. Whatever the tools are, make sure that you have the right tools for your organization and processes that are adding value, but not adding it too much overhead or bureaucracy to slow you down. You have to clearly define your roles and responsibilities and your expectations as well. If you're going to have project managers, make them project managers. They don't necessarily have to be full-time. They may have other responsibilities in the organization, but know who your project managers are and make sure that your organization knows who your project managers are, that they have the responsibility and that they have the role to be able to lead and implement your engagements and your initiatives. And make sure that they have training to know what they're doing, that they understand the expectations that are set for them, and that the organization understands the expectations for project management teams. All of this is typically done through an assessment and a recommendation and understanding your organization, your staffing requirements, and really finding the design that fits for you. And when you find that design, when it fits into your culture, then you will be able to see how the project management office is going to make your engagements much more efficient. It's going to make them much more effective. And most importantly, they're going to consistently deliver value across your portfolio. To give you an idea of how things may be different from a client by client perspective, we have John with us from Partners in Care, and I'd actually like to turn it over to him at this point to talk about PMO implementation from one client's perspective.
Super. Thank you very much, PR. This has been, hopefully as you listen through Yomi walk through the initial and then what PR, you really will hopefully drive home here exactly how we got to ourselves to the point where we needed to engage with the PMO. So next slide. So, Partners in Care has been in business for about 25 years. Very specifically, it was started to keep independent physicians have a place where they could aggregate into risk-based contracts. And this was 25 years ago and has since morphed into what is now value-based care arrangements. So Partners in Care is an IPA/SIN, and it's important to note that just simply because we had the designation of a clinically integrated network did not 100% mean that we were in compliance with that. So as Yomi kind of walked you through the complexity, and we talk about the phase of maturity, and we talk about being an IPA and /SIN. We also had MSO services that we offered. We had recently created a medical group, which is a single TIN entity. And we had value-based care arrangements. We had upside-only contracts, and we were working towards going to risk models, which then brought us to the question of culturally, were we ready for the risk-based contracts with our people in the pop health, with our data and analytics platforms, financially? Were we there from a compliance perspective? And did we have the right physician engagement? And when we kind of looked at that whole spectrum and said, my God, we've got all that complexity. We've got all of these different kinds of products that we offer. We have 10 different payers in the state that have all different varying degrees of the spectrum on the value-based care, from just simple PMPM to risk, and we have multiple populations to manage. And then you look at that global flow of dollars that Yomi went through. We said, wow, are we really prepared to deliver on all this? And by engaging COPE to do a full assessment of all of that inventory we just talked about, it led us to the decision that we really needed to engage from a PMO perspective. So let's, next slide. So what we did by engaging with COPE to do that assessment and then walk into this co-source PMO type arrangement was the ability to really, as I said internally, is kind of COPE was brought in to really help us learn how to fish so that we in time can go out on our own and survive. And that's where, as PR mentioned, having that leadership position, you know, at first that leader is COPE, which, you know, quickly leads to us having our own leader who will then help us move forward collectively in time. But we really needed to make sure that we engaged and had COPE come in from the PMO perspective to make sure that our people were assessed, and we determined whether we should be hiring, whether we should be going out and purchasing those services to ensure that we had the best staff to deliver on all the different programs. We had them engage by looking at all of our payer contracts and determine whether we should be going aggressively after a higher base of shared savings, or, you know, pushing to go towards more risk with each one of those. And then also engaging with them on all of our organizations. And that's where the, you know, when I talked about the SIN organization, to make sure that we legally were set up properly so that we would be completely compliant. And therefore, in addition to offering value-based care to our independent physicians in the state of New Jersey, we also could then go out and offer fee-for-service arrangements and do it compliantly as a clinically integrated network. Because remember, we're both an IPA, SIN/MSO/medical group. So we need to make sure that we are performing the proper function at the proper contracted entity. So, you know, the beauty of the PMO is that, you know, we were able to get the right legal entities to help us. We were able to help organize all of our people and processes in place. We were able to do a full analysis of what would be the best analytics tools so that we could deliver on the programs. I can just tell you, I know it sounds like, you know, if any of you are fans of A Christmas Story, you know, you're going to say, what, a crummy commercial? But I would say that, you know, when we looked through everything, we wound up with analytics as risk contracting, ARC, which happened to be a COPE solution, but by far gave us the best insight and way to manage all the contracts that we had. And I would suggest highly that everybody take a look at it. I mean, we looked at all the different services out there, and this ARC product really is spectacular. And even when we have shown it to our payer partners, they have been wildly impressed with it. And our physicians can make actionable items, and they all seem very engaged and want to use the system. So collectively, when you combine the changes that we were able to make with the PMO along with the ARC system that we have in place, we feel very confident that you know, we're making the changes internally. We're going to, as PR put, bring that complexity with the multiple projects, the multiple organizations, to be able to you know, take and optimize our resources and deliver on all the programs. And so it really, PR, you nailed it. It's not a one size fits all. You know, every different group has complexity. I can't recommend highly enough to get a group like COPE to come in to do an assessment, which, you know, you may find out, hey, as PR said, you only need a little bit of help, or you may find that you need a huge amount of help. But it's good to get the full grounding, and I'm glad that we had the opportunity to do it, because it's really helped expose where we were short and the help that we needed. but invaluable, and we're excited about where we can go with this. So I appreciate them giving me the opportunity to speak on this, and we're excited to see the outcomes continue. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alan.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate it. So at the end of the, what are the key takeaways? Having worked with a lot of folks across the country and talking to people now about the fact that, risk isn't going anywhere, and it's such a big cultural shift. And, unless you're in Los Angeles and you're a capitated group, or you're in, Massachusetts and a couple of markets where, capitation and risk has taken hold. I think for me, the key takeaway is that value-based payment is not going away. Everyone's going to have to learn from a provider and payer perspective how to make it work, but it's complicated, right? And, the old saying, culture eats strategy for lunch. And so the whole point to me is to understand what it is you're trying to go do. Make sure you organize yourselves with deadlines and timelines and division of labor and very specific milestones, and have staff assigned to go do that. That's what a PMO is, right? I mean, to simplify what PR and Yomi and JJ so eloquently shared. And so I think at the end of the day, what's important is less so, to be honest with you, whether somebody external helps you, more so that having that discipline internally to have a clear vision, a clear strategy, and to drive that down into clear initiatives with people assigned milestones and deadlines. That's really the key. And that's where I've seen people nationally sometimes falter or struggle. They know that a year and a half from now, they want to be in a global risk arrangement. What they're struggling with is to break the work down in such a way that they can have milestones along the way, and they can understand if they're on track. And that's really what a PMO, in my opinion, does for you. So we're really pleased and appreciative to have you all have joined us. We got a couple of questions, and so I'm going to ask the group a couple of questions as we wrap up here. So PR, one of the questions we got, just to be a little bit specific, if a medical group in particular, right, is thinking about moving into risk, what are some key considerations that they should keep in mind? What should they be thinking about in terms of organizing themselves, PMO-like, particularly a group that's not so large, maybe a mid-sized group, 25 to 50 docs? How can they do this in a way that's not overwhelming, but will be effective?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. So in addition to some of the considerations that I've already discussed about methodologies and structure, that kind of thing, one of the important things to remember is that in a lot of schools of thought, not everybody is going to succeed at being a project manager. There are skills that are necessary for the role, including a lot of soft skills, the ability to manage and influence and communicate across lots of different kinds of people, the ability to speak at all levels of the organization, but even more importantly, the ability to understand, in this particular case, aspects like contract management, able to understand the flow of the funds and where the value is going, able to understand really the overall objectives and the structure that you are working to put in place. In understanding those kind of things, the project manager is going to be able to more effectively work with teams across the organizations, pull together the appropriate people, and keep things that are on track as you're going about delivering on this roadmap. As I'd mentioned, even for an organization of 40, 50 people, you may only have initiatives that are going to require, maybe one person or maybe even a person half the time. But you want to look for that right person in the organization who has not just the technical skills, but also the relationship capability to be able to motivate teams, keep them focused. And Alan, like you were talking about, chart that roadmap that gets us from where we are currently to that end state and make sure that we're progressing appropriately along the way.
Thank you, PR. I really appreciate it. Yomi, I'm going to throw this one at you. So for larger AMCs, right, with their specific, graduate education and, large networks, sometimes partnered with community networks, focus on teaching and research, but also, of course, care, right, often trauma center. For an institution like that, what would be some of the critical success factors that you would share in having them put together the right type of project management office operation to ensure success as they're working toward an incremental pathway from where they are today, mostly fee-for-service, to more global risk?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. The more larger organization like an AMC, the complexity just grows. And unfortunately, I wish I can tell you that everything will stop and then value-based will take place and life is good from that point forward. It's going to be a case whereby you are still driving your base business as well as trying to stand up this new capability or combine both of them together. So being able to, first of all, align metrics, assuming that we've already gone through the phase of the strategy makes sense, you've analyzed the contract, and this is the right direction to go. So that would probably be the first thing. But being able to align the metrics across all the different type of businesses that we are doing, especially for an AMC that they are used to counting volumes. Now that we are introducing different metrics to the equation, how do we balance it together, as many of them might contradict each other? So it's a primary input to what type of PMO infrastructure we need to set up. Because without that, as nice of the infrastructure as we might come up with, they will forever eat the wall of the other business. And as you can imagine, those other businesses are probably more mature and they're probably more senior in the organization. So being able to align that as we drive into the PMO and having those accountable leader that Pierre mentioned, seasoned and senior enough from a relationship standpoint to be able to bridge those gaps as those conflicts arises. But we need to do as much as possible to ensure that we have alignment of goals and metrics before we jump right into it.
Thank you, Yomi. That was really helpful. And John, not last but certainly not least, question for you is, okay, so you've put a PMO in place. So you talked about how you organized and put the PMO in place. Can you talk about just a few examples of what you've been able to achieve, whether it's around scale or performance or efficiency or satisfaction, anything that you've seen that you think that PMO helped with, and anything you can share about what in particular you think has been useful to you to pick as you've put this kind of a structure in place?
For sure, Alan. I think the biggest thing, obviously, is from a compliance standpoint. PIC is an aggregation of around 600 physicians throughout the state, all wildly independent. And so, we needed to make sure that we had the right structure in place to be able to service the membership properly. And so by having the PMO step in, we were able to identify where we had fallen short from a compliance perspective around being able to truly be able to offer and be a clinically integrated network. So to be able to not have to worry about who the proper legal resources would be, we were able to jump on that and get that set up properly internally. We were set up from a governance perspective properly as an organization, but really needed to make sure that we were doing the proper activities from an actual clinical and committee standpoint. So super helpful to identify that, to make sure that we had that in place. And then also doing a full inventory of all of our contracts, being that there are a good 10 to 15 different payer contracts, all with varying degrees of how do we deliver whether some are just a simple monthly CCT fee as opposed to some upside downside risk, and then Medicare Direct. So really trying to work that inventory, making sure that our teams were working properly to make sure that we were getting the most out of each contract. So I think between the setup, between the full inventory, and then being able to interject the ARC product to make sure that we were engaging properly with the physicians so that we could get the proper outcomes were the three biggest areas that we found were where we're getting the immediate and best results.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. So thank you all so much, John, Yomi, and PR. And for our audience, we really appreciate you being here. Again, we'll be sending you out the PDF deck, the recording, and the Q&A after the webinar. We hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay safe. So a little sketchy out there sometimes. And we thank you for everything you all are doing for our communities. Have a wonderful day, and Alice will go ahead and sign off.